welcome to Truck Talk. I'm your host, Tyler Christensen, and today I have with me Drew Easton, Executive Vice President of Amwins and a current board member of the Motor Carrier Insurance Education Foundation. So welcome, Drew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, you're currently with Amwins, but you've served in various capacities pre-Amwins days. So let's start there just so everybody can learn a little bit about you and what your experience comes from.
Sure. I had the privilege of working with some pretty darn good insurance carriers back in the day. Got started with Federated Insurance, and they put you through quite a bit of training and development. I was a claims adjuster there, handling all types of losses, including quite a bit of auto-related losses. From there, I moved on to Great West Casualty, served initially as an adjuster there as well, handling different types of trucking-related losses. And then I was dragged over to the underwriting side, and that's where I've kind of been ever since. I crossed over at Great West, and I've since moved on to what was formerly known as Gresham and Associates, a small family-owned wholesaler and MGA. I came on as a program administrator with an environmental transport program. That was really my background at Great West. I was doing quite a bit of environmental and hazmat underwriting. So I came on board to the dark side of the MGA world, and we were acquired by Amwins, and here we are years later.
There you go. Well, you said you've called it the dark side, and you've also talked about being drug into underwriting. So coming from claims to, now the underwriting side of the house, what are the things that keep you up at night?
Well, that's an interesting question. Obviously, there's a lot that's going on in our industry. We have driver shortages. We have equipment utilization issues. We've got the chip problem that's going on with new equipment right now. Social inflation, which really gives me pause, the lack of tort reform. But I would say this, the focus on that next generation of underwriter and claims adjuster, that talent pool, I don't know that we as an industry are doing all we can to really develop those folks. Coming up in the 90s, we had carriers that really spent a lot of time and effort on schools and actual formal education for these folks. And obviously, we've got a lot of universities that have their risk management programs, which are fantastic. So that does give folks a little bit of a leg up. But I think we really need to focus on that next level of talent in a more formalized process. We do a lot of mentoring. We do a lot of tormenting, in my case. And obviously, the MCIEF, the reason for this call, they do a great job of being that other leg to the stool, if you will, that helps support these people to understand the product that we're trying to provide.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we talk about, new generations coming in, certainly our industry is evolving. Technology is always a big topic of conversation. How do you feel as autonomous vehicles come more in play, especially in the trucking industry, how that's going to affect our industry from, the underwriting side of the house to the type of coverages that are going to be required, even how, they're going to be handled in litigation?
It's going to be an interesting play here. Obviously, it's coming. We're not going to stop technology. We believe there's a need. At least I do believe there's a need. It's going to solve some of the challenges we have with driver shortages. It's also going to solve some of that human aspect of what we have with distracted driving and some of those other issues that become part of those nuclear verdict losses that we all read so much about and experience. I think the biggest issue is how we're going to respond as an insurance industry. What used to be an auto liability loss now may become a general liability loss if there's programming involved with that autonomous vehicle. It's not necessarily going to be driver error, it's going to be programmer error. So I think that's really going to require a lot of our smart individuals out there, the big thinkers, to figure out how we're going to address this. But it is definitely coming.
Have you been having these conversations, being on the wholesale side? What have you heard from your carriers? Are they preparing for this? Are they talking about it? How do they feel they're going to have to evolve from an underwriting perspective, as this comes down the pipe?
They're definitely trying to prepare for it. I think we are seeing the spectrum here. We have folks that are truly embracing that this is the future, and they're trying to get ahead of it as quickly as they can. We have other folks that are still somewhat perhaps naive about it, maybe trying to delay their efforts there. As part of Amwins, we do have some specialists that's really a big part of what they do right now. They're involved in that autonomous driverless transportation insurance, and they write quite a bit of it. So we do have some experts that are out there. And to your question, I think it's all over the board as to how people are going to respond to it and how they're currently responding to it. We got to learn more.
Yeah. From a carrier perspective, something that we're talking about now in order to prepare is how are the coverages going to change? You mentioned that. Is it a GL exposure? Is it a products liability exposure? How do we tailor ourselves as a transportation division to be able to accommodate these risks and, evolve as these come to light? We don't want to be the last one to the table, but there's still a lot of questions, until we really know how the courts are going to respond in some of these cases. It's going to be challenging to, develop the forms and provide the coverages that are necessary So a lot of ambiguity still, but it's certainly on its way.
It is, and to your point about the general liability, one of those things we tend to forget is most GL policies are written within aggregate, right? And we
Right.
talk about motor carriers; they tend to have multiple losses throughout a year if you're a risk of size, and that aggregate may come into play pretty quickly.
You're right. It's a good comment. Well, on the topic of claims, let's talk about nuclear verdicts. There's been quite a few out there. We've had a couple of verdicts that were substantially high down in the southeast the last couple of years. But to your personal experience, I want to talk about, how have nuclear verdicts played a role? For certainly, if you have any examples, you can talk about, bring those up. But how do nuclear verdicts play a role in your agency, the conversations you're having with your retail agents about possibly the need for excess limits or what's enough?
Well, to answer the last question, I don't know what is enough. I mean, obviously, the events that we're reading about and we're all experiencing with respect to nuclear verdicts and social inflation are rather challenging and concerning, to be candid with you. But we have always counseled our partners, specifically our retailers and the motor carriers we do involve ourselves with directly. uh, we always count them to buy what you can afford, and that's what it comes down to. Number one, it's a difficult conversation to have, but I don't know many people that are overinsured necessarily. But the other side of that is we help recognize the structure of the motor carrier. There's certain things they can do structurally with their counsel to insulate themselves from some of this loss activity that's out there, from some of these ridiculous numbers that are being thrown about. But the challenge is really need to find a way to get some tort reform going at the grassroots level to help limit and to help make some sense of what a real number is. People just have this lottery effect, and they tend to look at every small aspect of a motor carrier and recognize that they're guilty until proven innocent. And unfortunately, if you've ever been a part of a vehicle inspection with the DOT, it's challenging to find a motor carrier that doesn't have some type of defect as they go through that audit. So that doesn't necessarily make them a bad motor carrier. And we've got to get the public educated relative to that not every 80,000-pound sledgehammer is a problem.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm with you. Well, I know you're an environmental guy. You have good programs in place within Amwins and some great carriers that you partner with. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, what I'd like to also ask is, what's your craziest claim that you've seen? There's many underwriters, maybe carriers, even wholesalers that are out there that may be scared or turned away from some of those environmental exposures, but possibly, they can sometimes be better risks. So talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk about the craziest claim you've ever had. Do those two go hand in hand, or was it a different type of operation?
Well, being an old claims guy, we have seen the hilarious and the horrific. And unfortunately, it tends to be the horrific that you remember more than the hilarious. But yeah, we're dealing with 80,000-pound sledgehammers, as I mentioned before. And when you have contact with some other structure, some other being, something else, there's going to be significant damage and harm. I've been very fortunate to be specialized in this deep and narrow niche that is environmental. And as part of my start, I was involved with the infamous Superfund cleanups back in the day, where we had to identify potentially responsible parties and go through dump tickets and all kinds of access receipts for motor carriers and other type of entities that came to various sites to dispose of product. And then we had to recognize what our responsibility and liability was there. And I don't know if it's necessarily entertaining or what have you, but I was a part of stroking some very, very large checks. And that was interesting, being a young guy in the day and presenting folks with seven-figure checks. It was humbling and concerning at the same time.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. All right. Well, certainly we wanted to hear from you and about your organization, but a big component of this is certainly the benefits that come from the MCIEF organization. So you just joined the board as of October of last year. So let's talk a little bit about that and why you want to even be involved with this type of organization.
Being on the carrier side for so long prior to jumping onto the MGA side, I just had no idea that anything like this even existed. And back then, it was really participating in the AAMGA. And that's when I first crossed paths with Tommy Ruke, and that would have been back in 2004. And I was pretty impressed with the product that Tommy was providing back then, trying to help people understand the nuances of truck insurance. And I also recognized that he was one hell of an advocate for the trucking industry and the trucker specific. And of course, you learn that he's the son of a pickle guy, and all those other things that have become part of Tommy's legend, but it's all real. And I was just so impressed with the quality of product and the education that came through that, that when the MCIEF evolved and Tommy started this with the original group of board members, there was no question that I was going to be a part of it. And more importantly, try to find ways to advocate and support it as well. We view it as an important part of our training process for all of our folks. I don't care if they're new to the industry or just new to us. We really strive to get all of our folks participating in it and earn that valuable TRS designation. We also try to use that as a calling tool, if you will, for our preferred agents. We like our retailers to have this common knowledge that we have, and at least we know we're speaking on a level playing field with these folks when we talk about the risks that we underwrite on their behalf. So I have been a huge fan of not just Tommy, but of the MCIF since day one, and even going back to the AAMGA days.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate you having you as an advocate, and good call out. Like to hear that you see preferred retail agents holding that TRS designation behind their name. All right. So as we kind of keep on the realm of MCIF, what's something that you feel that you've learned from being a part of the MCIS organization that's kind of helped you in your day to day, or something that you may have not known?
I'm an old guy, so I would like to say that I learned quite a bit. Unfortunately, I think what the reality is, I'm reminded quite a bit. And what I mean by that is, let's be honest, the folks that attend the MCIF are the best and brightest in our industry. And so to be able to rub elbows with those guys and gals, I hope that some of that rubs off on me, or I'm reminded of some of the things that maybe I was involved with earlier in my career. And most certainly, we want to help mentor and torment that next level of folks that are attending there, that new generation, if you will. I would say really just understanding that we're not alone in this, that there are a lot of experts out there in the transportation world, or a lot of experts that want to be experts. And to have that network is by far the most incredible thing. While I'm a wholesaler, and there are a ton of other wholesalers that participate in the MCIF, we're really friendly competitors. And it's not uncommon to exchange that information. And with folks like yourself as well, you do business with a lot of us. And to allow us to meet all of the folks in one large event is pretty interesting as well. So I would say it's a number of things, though, to get a direct answer to your question. I love the white papers that Tommy throws out. I think those are sparked from a unique question that comes into the MCIF or directly to Tommy. I do like the truck talks. All those opportunities to disseminate information and also to continue to advocate for the transportation industry that we all love so much. I think that's been the biggest part and the biggest advantage that we have from being a part of the MCIF.
I like the fact that you said, by being a part of it and attending, that you're often reminded. You may not be learning something new, and I think that's a good reminder for our viewers. So often we talk to more senior level underwriters or producers that are like, well, I attended, these classes back in, the 90s as at AMGA, and I don't have my TRS designation, so why should I pursue it now? I think it's important that, although we're still talking about the motor carrier coverage form and it's still the same industry, we do focus our classes and the topics that are discussed to trending and evolving issues. Yes, the same coverages do apply, and yes, it's still the same industry, but it is new information. And I think that whether you've been in the industry for 30 plus years or you're entirely new, everyone can find a benefit from this organization, and specifically attending our classes and conferences.
Absolutely. And one thing I think about the classes and the conferences, especially those that are in person, is the networking that really occurs on the breaks and after hours and what have you. It is invaluable. And it's not just socializing with a cocktail in your hand or whatever else. It is truly learning about the industry and getting some insight, because we have folks that are just regional experts that are there. And to have the opportunity to scratch their brain and their memory is just a fantastic access point. So yeah, I would encourage anybody that has any thought of returning to or being a member of, they should most certainly take advantage of it, because I do believe it is one of the most valuable arrows you can put in your quiver to be an expert in this transportation field that we enjoy so much success with.
Yep. No, I agree. Let's focus on the younger generation. You mentioned that early on, and it's true. For many years it seems like there was kind of a gap in our industry. You had more senior, and then it took a while, and now we're bringing a lot of new young folks. Certainly a great career path, but what words of advice could you give, newer insurance associates about MCIEF and kind of where to start, or even somebody maybe that's more privy to P&C that's trying to get into the truck space?
I would say first and foremost, as a new person, a younger person coming into the industry, more than likely they're not recognizing how much time they have and how valuable time is as a commodity. So take the opportunity to race through your development. You're not going to catch everything, you're not going to identify everything, but you're going to get that good basis and you're going to plant all these seeds for further development. So number one, I would say take charge of your development and get after it. With respect to the MCIEF, you're right, this is ancillary to a lot of other industries. It doesn't have to be folks that just write trucking insurance. There's such a layover with all these other industries, specifically some P&C operations, et cetera, that they too can benefit from it. Just an intimate knowledge of the motor carrier form, just having exposure to Rob Mosley and what he sees on the legal aspect and legal side of this, just all those sources of knowledge is phenomenal for folks. And to recognize you got access to these people. You attend the annual conference, you're going to be able to spend time, as much time really as they'll allow you to, with those individuals. And that's just phenomenal. But the young folks coming in, I would encourage them to mosey up to the folks that have a little bit of gray in their beard. I would encourage them to talk to the folks that may not necessarily fit within their typical mix of friends and contacts, because I guarantee you they're going to find a mentor, or in my case, a tour mentor, that may last them for their career. And that's what this MCIEF event does beyond just the formal education.
Good. That's good info. All right. Well, as we kind of wrap things up here, the annual conference is always in October. We have a new Western conference this year that we certainly have had a lot of interest in. What can you say about what the viewers can expect? Certainly we've talked about the classes, you've talked about the networking, and you've talked about the cocktail parties. But if somebody's new and coming in, what's the piece of advice, or what can they expect to experience from our MCIF conference, maybe compared to some of the other industry conferences, NAPSLO, the old AMGA days?
Well, for one thing, there are a bunch of truckers down there, are truck-related folks, and there's not a stranger down there. So be prepared to have your hand shaken many times, and don't be afraid to introduce yourself to these folks as well, because everybody is most certainly extremely approachable. And I think that's the unique thing about it. I don't necessarily want to say family, because maybe we're somewhat dysfunctional, but it is not dislike a very large family reunion, seeing folks that you may not see except one time a year, seeing that Aunt Polly or whomever it may be, but getting that hug and tugging on folks. It's just a really laid back, informal event that exchanges a great deal of information. And having had the privilege of attending almost every industry function, I will tell you, this is by far the most fun, entertaining, and informative event that I typically attend.
Yeah, I would agree. It's always fun for us as a company to walk into a room with our primary competitors and watch the transition of how those folks can immediately come from a competitor to a thought partner over the course of 48 to 72 hours. It is one big family. I like that you said dysfunctional, because what family isn't dysfunctional? But certainly we've all gained a lot of relationships out of that environment, and the MCIF continues to grow and deliver more and more.
Do you remember your first event?
I do. It was the motor carrier 1 and the motor carrier 2 classes. They were hosted in Phoenix. At the time, we still host classes down in Phoenix, and that was probably about 9 or 10 years ago. That's when Tommy and Rich Bren were down there, and we had a good group. There was a group of retail agents, a group of wholesalers, a group of carrier folks, and it was interesting because I think that was the first time, I've had the opportunities to serve in both the retail, the wholesale, and the company space. But for those that haven't, it is an environment that you get to hear that other perspective and understand what it's like dealing with the client firsthand versus being that middleman on the wholesaler broker side versus just the company underwriter that's, the decision maker. So that was the most exciting piece for me. And that's certainly why I encourage my team to be involved, is just to hear the challenges that each person within the process, experiences. And, we've brought on folks from the wholesale side, and we've had associates that have decided to pursue either the retail side or the wholesale side as well. And I think a lot of that comes from the relationships they've built from the MCIF organization and just wanting to try something new.
That's fantastic. How many people from that very first event do you still stay in contact with?
Quite a bit. Some of them I work with now through relationships that we have at Nationwide. Some of these folks, though, I only see once a year, but it's still exciting to revisit and have our catch up and have those conversations. When we're all down in Orlando.
That's excellent. And I think that's just that added extra that the MCIF gives you is truly the networking as we would expect it to be.
And two, it's interesting to me. It's such a niche line of business, and it is a small world. So it's always fun to see, those names of, okay, where are they now? Because we've all evolved, and many of us have moved around and are with different either companies or agencies, and it always seems to be the same people. And so it's really important, certainly for the viewers today, to get involved. If you're new to us and you don't know much about MCIEF, certainly you'll learn a lot from these truck talks. You can look at previous truck talks. We have a lot of resources online to get the TRS, Transportation Risk Specialist designation, virtual settings, trucking you, live classes. So, like I said, I've used this word a lot, but the program overall has entirely evolved and can fit any needs virtually or in person. So we hope to get you to join us and hope that you'll continue to learn about us and want to get involved with our organization. Well, Drew, that's it for the questions for today. Do you have any closing comments to close us out?
I would simply say, yeah, take the advice from Tyler, give it a shot, listen to Road Dog Radio as Tommy Ruke is on there with great regularity. That'll give you some insight as to who he is. And I would say if this doesn't prove that I have a face for radio and a personality for social distancing, I don't know what does, Tyler.
Well, Drew, we certainly appreciate your time today. Appreciate your involvement with MCIEF, certainly being a member of the board and representing Amwins. But we will see you soon. Will you be attending the West Conference this year, or will you just be in Orlando?
Regrettably, I will not, but I will definitely be in Orlando. We will have a hazmat breakout that I'll be a part of. So I'm looking forward to seeing some new faces down there and a lot of familiar faces.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to seeing you. Thank you, sir.
Yep, take care.